Hi, I'm Lillian, welcome back to my channel Ink and Pages. This video is going to be part 2 of my spring reading wrap up, and we are going to start off with volume 4 of the Monstress graphic novel series. This volume is called The Chosen, and this series is by Marjorie Liu and Sana Takada. This story is set in a high fantasy but kind of steampunk matriarchal Asian inspired world, and it follows Micah, who is this young woman with this deadly power, shall we say, living inside her, and she has to kind of work out what it is and what she can do with it and what its origins are, maybe, all while the world around her is filled with this growing conflict between humans and arcanics like Micah. Arcanics are kind of like descendants of, they're kind of like human-animal hybrids, I guess, but not like any animal. They're descended from this fantasy race called the Ancients, and the Ancients are like magical animals. I love this series. This was a reread. It's the second time I've read this volume. This one felt more political than the others in the series. There was a bit more standing around talking about things happening than actual things happening. So I've given it 3.5 stars. It's still very good. I still really love this series. I love how complex and far-reaching it is. It's like my favorite thing about it. And this volume had kind of like a big twist reveal moment, I would say. I remembered it so distinctly from the first time I read it, but I would say on second time round, obviously on second time round it's not going to be as shocking, but I think maybe I overestimated how important this twist reveal was going to be. Like on second time round it was still big, but it was not quite as monumental as I remember it being. And I followed that up by reading volume 5 of the Monstress series. This one's called Warchild, and this was the first time I read it. In this volume, we get to find out more about what happened at Constantine, which is sort of like this big event before the series starts. That's been this mystery ever since volume 1. And we finally got to get some more details, which was very exciting. But this did a really good job of balancing, like answering questions and mysteries that we've had for ages, and also introducing new mysteries and new questions that we now want to get answered. And I loved how pretty much everything that happened in this volume has been like quietly brewing on the back burner all the way through previous novels. There's a major character in this series called the Shaman Empress, who is this big character. I mean, she's been dead for thousands of years by the time this series takes place, but we're getting lots of little insights and a couple of memories and like flashbacks based around her, which are so interesting. And I'm pretty obsessed with her character. Like, I do think her character and her actions are like what I would consider the most intriguing mystery in this series. And this volume just keeps giving us like more tantalizing little glimpses into her character and who she really was and what she really did and why. And I cannot wait to find out more in the rest of the series. I want to mention one specific little prediction I made while reading this volume. So there's a scene in here which I think is in like a cave, and then there's like cave paintings and engravings in the wall on the background of the characters. Not much emphasis is placed upon them, but I know they are going to be important, and I think that in several volumes time, or even at the end of the series, I'm going to be able to look back on this volume at that scene and be like, so that's what the cave paintings were talking about. Because that is just the perfect example to show how nothing in this series is an accident. Like, there's no throwaway comments, there's no detail too small to be relevant. Like, everything is important and everything will come full circle eventually, even if it takes several volumes to do so. And you can enjoy this series and the characters and the mysteries and the slowly unwinding plot with the knowledge that you're in safe hands with these authors, and like they know exactly what's going to happen and they've plotted it all out, and it is just this grand master plan that we have the pleasure of slowly learning about. But yeah, really liked this one and gave it 4 stars. Next was another reread, which was Every Heart a Doorway by Shauna Maguire. This is a book where every now and then some children will have a doorway open for them, and it will take them to a kind of fantasy world, a bit like Narnia or The Wizard of Oz or Alice in Wonderland. And this series deals with the children who come back through those doors and didn't really want to, because the world they found themselves in was actually the perfect place for them, and maybe even the first place they really felt like they were at home. So this novella follows Nancy, who has recently come back reluctantly through one of these doors back into our world, and she goes to Eleanor West's Home for Wayward Children, which is designed all for children like her, and for them to deal with their experiences and what it means to be back, and also to cope with the fact that they're probably never going to find their door again and go back into the world where they so desperately want to be. So I loved the cool fantasy elements of this, and like learning about the doors and hearing about lots of different people's experiences going through the doors, and like what kind of worlds they ended up in, the different kind of worlds there are out there. But I also love that this book is kind of a murder mystery. I liked Nancy as a main character. I thought she was a really good choice to follow as we are introduced to this idea of different worlds, and to go to the school and learn about what it's like there. And because this is really short book, it was always very fast-paced and exciting, which I really liked. It just has a lot of elements that I really loved, and so I really enjoyed it again, even on the second time round, and I gave it again 4 stars. Then I read the next 2 books in this series, starting with Down Among the Sticks and Bones. This is a prequel novella, so the whole series is a series of companion books. They're not necessarily direct sequels, such as this. This is a prequel about 2 of the side characters were introduced in the first book, these twins called Jack and Jill. In this story, we get to hear a bit about their childhood and them finding their door that took them to this sort of creepy world called the Moors. And I really enjoyed it. I was picturing the Moors as kind of like this classic, creepy, gothic horror story kind of world. I was actually picturing like the first 10 minutes of the film Van Helsing, where everything's in black and white. Like that was very much the vibe I envisioned for the Moors. The world was just really cool and creepy, and I really enjoyed reading about it and their adventures there. And the writing of this book was actually like really beautiful and elegant. So it felt both like a classic horror story and also like a brand new fairy tale at the same time. Now, some reviews of this book and the series said you should read this book first before Every Hard Doorway, because otherwise Every Hard Doorway like spoils Jack and Jill's story and their ending for you. To which I say, this is a prequel. Its whole job is to like go back in time and tell you more about the world or some of the characters and flesh things out a bit, which this does perfectly. Like it perfectly fulfills its purpose in being a prequel. So please, I beg you, read these books in the correct order, as in publishing order, and you will get everything out of them that you are supposed to. If this book was meant to be the first book in the series, it would be the first book in the series. As I said in my Buzzwordathon vlog for this story is not wasted or pointless because you already know how Jack and Jill's story ends. If you've read Every Hard Doorway, which you should have before you read this, it actually just makes it more tragic, kind of, and powerful, and it gives it this extra edge of emotion because you're reading it and you know exactly what happens. You know how their story ends and they have no idea and they can't do anything about it. And you would completely miss all of that if you read these books in the wrong order because you think you know better than the author. So all that to say, this was a good book. I liked it not quite as much as Every Hard Doorway, so I'm giving it 3 stars. And then I read the 3rd book in this series, Beneath the Sugar Sky. So 3 books in, I'm realizing there's a bit of a pattern to them. Every other book takes place kind of at Eleanor West's Home for Wayward Children, and then every other alternating book is kind of like a prequel or a side story that focuses on one particular character, or 2 in the case of Jack and Jill, and talks solely about their adventures in their door and in their world. So this book brings us back to the school and the real world, which unfortunately I didn't really love because I don't like Eleanor West as a character. I mean, we don't see much of her, but I think she's wholly unsuited to running a school. She just seems very irresponsible and kind of neglectful, and I would not trust her with any actual safeguarding of these children she is responsible for. Anyway, this book I did not really enjoy, not just because I don't like Eleanor, she's barely in it. It just felt very out of place in the series. I didn't really care about the plot and I didn't really care about the characters. And this time I would agree with the more negative reviews I've read because it seems like I'm not the only person who considers this kind of the weak point in the series. So remember how I said Every Hard Doorway was kind of also a murder mystery? In this book, they try and save the life of one of the characters who was murdered in the first book. How, I hear you ask? Because that character, the door they went through took them to a nonsense world. So they're banking on the fact that with a bit of nonsense help, they can probably bring her back to life, right? My problem with that was I did not care about that character and did not mind when they were murdered in book 1. And also, I don't like nonsense worlds. And it's the same reason for both, it's because I find them both very annoying. And although this book starts in the real world at the school, It quickly turns into kind of like a travel book, I guess you would say, and they go to some places that I did not care about at all. So it was just not for me. It was so weird how the formula suddenly broke down, and after enjoying 2 books in the series, I really didn't get on with this one. I'm giving it 2.5 stars because it was mostly bearable, with some bits I did actually enjoy a bit, but not enough for me to say that I actually liked this book or would recommend it. Then I read The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. This is translated from Japanese. This story is kind of like a mild sci-fi story, I would say, and it's set on a small Japanese island where every now and then the inhabitants wake up in the morning and realize they have forgotten something. Not just like specific memories of theirs, but actual items or kinds of item. And so they just have to get rid of them because they no longer remember what they're for and they no longer have any kind of emotional connection to them. And then there's this group of people called the Memory Police who enforce this forgetting, and they try and find anyone whose memories are intact and who may still remember the things that everyone else has forgotten. And that's just such a cool idea and so interesting. And I'd heard people compare this book to 1984, which I read a while ago, yes, but I do remember very fondly, so I was excited to pick this up. Unfortunately, the author seems to have taken this really cool, interesting concept and then written the most boring possible book about it. It was such a waste of time to read, honestly. It was so disappointing. And the only reason I kept reading was because I was interested in this central concept. And I kept hoping against hope that something would happen to be interesting and to make this an interesting exploration of the idea. And it just was not. There was just no like substance to this book. The writing felt very clinical, it wasn't very compelling. I didn't care about any of the characters except for like the old man character. None of the characters in here really have names, which like I thought was gonna mean something. It didn't. The story just had no action or energy and no heart. I just didn't care about any of it in the end. And the main character in here is an author, and there's a couple of like excerpts of her novel interspersed with the main story in here, so it's like a story in a story. And oh my god, I hated those bits. I hated them so much. The main character of this story in a story was so pathetic. She made me want to pull my hair out in frustration. I just hated them. If that was an actual book I was reading, I would have given up immediately and thrown it away. Literally, what was the point? And there wasn't one. And there wasn't a point, it turns out, to this entire book. I kept waiting and hoping that something would happen to warrant this book existing, and then I finished it and nothing ever did. So I've given this 1.5 stars, and it's officially my least favourite book of 2022 so far. Moving on, I next read Useless Magic by Florence Welch. And I'll just say for the record, before I start talking about this book, that I love Florence and the Machine. They are one of my favourite acts. I'm going to see them again in November. I could not be more excited to see them live. I love their music. This book was not the one. I'll start with the one positive thing I have to say, which is that the aesthetic of this book is actually very nice. So it's all sort of interspersed with famous like artworks. They're all very, you know, classic Florence and the Machine kind of style. It's got some of her like original notes in her handwriting and like little pieces of artwork and doodles and scribbles and stuff that she's obviously kept and put together and put in the book. It is exactly what you think a book of Florence and the Machine lyrics would look like. So, on to everything that was disappointing. This book is described as lyrics, poetry, and sermons. So we'll talk about them in that order. Lyrics, this book is basically a collection of all of the Florence and the Machine lyrics from her first 4 albums. And I knew going in that the majority of this book was just song lyrics. And I was fine with that. I was excited to read them as if they were poetry because a lot of them are really poetic and beautiful. And it was going well at first, but you almost immediately hit a snag, right? When you're reading the lyrics from their first album, Lungs, and then they've included in here a lot of lyrics from like deluxe edition songs that must have come out much later because I wasn't familiar with them. I know there was a 10th anniversary special release of the album, so I think some of the lyrics are from those songs. And so I didn't know them, so I went onto Spotify and started listening to the actual songs and demos while reading the lyrics in here. And let's just say there was a reason they did not make it onto the album. So that was a bit disappointing. Also then, the logic of what lyrics were included did not make sense to me. So you have like 6 extra songs that I'd never seen before included for the first album, Lungs. And then once you go on to the next album, they don't have any of the deluxe songs on there. And can I just say that Strangeness and Charm, which is a deluxe song from their second album, is one of my favourite Florence and the Machine songs ever, and it's just not in here. But even moving on from that, the more of the lyrics I read in here, the more I realised it's just full of mistakes. It's just full of mistakes. There are so many errors in here, like small things like they put the word is instead of was. Like, that's annoying, but I could get past it. But there's several instances of where just like the verses are in the wrong order. And I'm like, who wrote this book? These are your songs. And then I realized that what I'd hoped was a carefully curated and personalized book by Florence Welch, I think was probably cobbled together by an editor sitting in a back room, just like getting the lyrics off Google and copying and pasting them. And once I had that image of how this book was created, I just couldn't shake it. So like I said, this was published, I think like a month after their 4th album came out. So it has those songs in, but they're all in the wrong order. They're just in the wrong order. And all these stupid little dumb mistakes did was just piss me off, because I was listening to quite a lot of the songs while reading the lyrics for them. And all that did was reinforce the knowledge that her songs are better than just the lyrics alone. Like, music is better than poetry. Sue me. And so a book of Florence and the Machine lyrics is never going to be as good as the actual Florence and the Machine album, even if you got the fucking lyrics correct. So that's part 1. Next we have a few poems, which were fine. I won't lie, nothing groundbreaking. They were fine. My biggest issue is that I was reading them and I was thinking, oh, I wish these were songs. I wish these were song lyrics and she could sing them and make them into songs, and then I would just enjoy them so much more. And finally, the sermons were shit. I don't know what the point of them was. They weren't even anything. They were like 6 sentences that were like kind of not poetic enough to be poetry because they were just quite shit. It was like a try-hard 14-year-old writing what they think modern poetry would be. Every single one I read in like 20 seconds and then just went, what the fuck? So in conclusion, very disappointing, 2 stars. Ran over. That brings us to my final book I have to talk about in this wrap up, which is the book I most recently finished, and it is How to Kill Your Family by Bella Mackie. What a great title and what a great cover. This book is about a woman called Grace who has killed 6 members of her family, but is in prison for a crime she did not commit. And Grace was honestly such a great main character. I mean, pretty sure she's a psychopath, but what a great character to read from. I actually really loved reading from her perspective, and this book was so funny and interesting and compelling, and I was just flying through it. I was so invested. Until the last 10%. This book has an ending which, in my humble opinion, ruined everything it was doing. I'm not even joking. I was reading it and we were getting closer and closer to the end, and I was thinking like, oh, how do I wish this would end? And I've been enjoying the book so much. It had been giving me everything I wanted and everything I hoped for. So I started thinking, how do I think this book is going to end? I think it's going to end with giving me everything I wanted. And then it just didn't. The ending just felt very bizarre. It felt very bizarre that the author would write a story like that and then put that as the ending. It wasn't so much the actual like twist reveal thing that happens, because we could have moved past that. That's what I thought was going to happen. I thought once I understood what was happening, I kept thinking, oh, I know what Grace is going to do next. I know how this book is going to end. But actually nothing did happen. Grace and the plot didn't come back from it. It just sort of went 90% of the book, twist, end. And I did not like it. It left me very mad and disappointed, to be honest. However, this copy I own has like an exclusive epilogue at the back, like a short little extra chapter, because it's a special Waterstones edition or something. And that chapter did sort of do some damage control for me. It did sort of kind of redeem the ending a bit. Not enough, and I am still pissed at it, but it did prove that there was something there to show that the story doesn't actually end in that really annoying way. But that's like an exclusive little chapter. So do most people who read this book just get the story twist and it's over version of it? So even though when I was reading this, I was so convinced it was going to be a 4-star, maybe even a 4.5. I was like, this could be one of my favorite books of the year. killed it at the end, didn't it? So I'm giving it, I think, a 3-star. So those are the last of the books I read in spring. A very mixed bunch, as it turned out. I would love to know what your favourites and or least favourite book you read in spring was. Thank you so much for watching this video though, and I will see you in my next one.